Saturday Night is the latest film directed by Jason Reitman. It tells the story of the 90 minutes that led up to the very first episode of Saturday Night Live. The film stars Gabrielle LaBelle as Lorne Michaels and features an all-star ensemble cast of young and also older actors that you will recognize and some that you have never seen before, playing many SNL alum that you will recognize, but also stand-up comedians and musicians that were in the building at the time. I mean, the list goes on and on. You've got Nicholas Braun as Jim Henson and Andy Kaufman, J.K. Simmons as Milton Burley, William Dafoe as David Tibet, Lamorne Morris as Garrett Morris, Matthew Rhys as George Carlin, Dylan O'Brien as Dan Aykroyd, Corey Smith as Chevy Chase, Cooper Hoffman and Finn Wolfhard are in this film, as well as John Baptiste, who also does the score for this film, which is very SNL-esque. The score really adds to this fast-paced, high-energy dynamic, where you are feeling the stress of everyone trying to put together this show that they can't even really describe at the time. Now, full transparency, I am a really biased person when it comes to this film, because I love the history of SNL. And I do specify the history because it feels kind of weird to say you love SNL, because I think most people agree the past 10, 15 years just haven't been as remarkable as previous eras. But when I was in high school, and even now to a certain extent, I always loved the older years of this show. Going back to the 70s, the kind of dead zone they went into in the 80s, the comeback of the 90s, you cannot deny the influence this show has had on pop culture. And if there's any sort of message that this film is trying to get across, it is that this thing is important. And for that reason, I think a lot of people are going to find this film rather self-indulgent, because it doesn't really have much more to say other than that. They paint this group of misfits as the outcasts of comedy, the younger generation, the first people that were raised on TV making their own TV show. And you have a lot of higher up execs telling them they can't do it. And wouldn't you know it, they wind up putting on the show. And so as far as dramatic stakes and tension goes, it wants to be there, but it's not really, because we all know how the story goes. In order to fully enjoy this film, you do need to suspend your disbelief a decent amount. And for me, I think I was able to do that, but mostly because I was just in love with all the cameos and Easter eggs that I was recognizing. This is a film that gives all these actors an outlet to really give their best performance, whether it be through spot-on impressions or just unique characteristics that they normally wouldn't get to do. That is what drives this film, because this film, it could have been a disaster. We know how Chevy Chase behaves, so if we have a bad impression of him, this whole film is a wreck. The only reason it works so well is because this is a fast-paced script that does leave you on the edge of your seat, filled with these performances that feel so sincere. The other issue I think people might have with this film is the character development and the emotional arcs really aren't there. And the problem is, there are times where this movie wants it to be there. The framework that this movie has of existing within a actual 90 minutes, there's only so much that can happen. You can't really see a character rise and fall and rise again. And so there are these little moments where the film slows down and characters are having a conversation, and it feels like the movie wants these conversations to be life-altering for the people having them. But they're just not, because you can feel how forced they are. Specifically with Gabrielle LaBelle, like who I mentioned plays Lorne Michaels, and Rachel Sennett, who plays Rosie Schuster, who at one point was married to Lorne Michaels, but now is a writer and producer on the show. So there is a lot of interesting dynamics between these two characters, and that really is where a lot of the heart of this film wants to be. And I did really appreciate the moments that those two characters had with one another. I just think when you are limiting yourself to only exist within this very specific time frame, you are limited with how deep these characters can actually go. The other issue with this film is there is clearly a lot of fictional elements that are being added for dramatic tension. Like, I'm sorry, if you're putting together a live production that's going to go on NBC, you're not going to have lighting fall from the ceiling an hour before your cast is supposed to go on stage. And so this again goes with that suspension of disbelief, where if you think about it for more than 10 seconds of the logistics of how this would all work, you are realizing they're taking a lot of liberty with the facts here in order to add some sort of narrative for a film. But it's one of those things where I'm such a fan of what this film is trying to do, I was able to ignore a lot of those issues, at least while watching the film. It's one of those experiences where you're sitting sitting down, you're having a blast, you're on the edge of your seat, everyone else is laughing around you, catching the references, and then you walk out of the theater and realize, that didn't make all that much sense. But I will say those criticisms are rather minor in comparison to all the positives I found within this film, and maybe that's just because I do agree with the premise that SNL is one of the most important things that has happened to pop culture in the past 50 years. But I would be shocked if you watch this movie and do not have at least a decent time. So those are my thoughts on Saturday Night, and I would love to hear yours if you have seen the film. So if you've seen it, comment below, and I will see you next time.